My name is Emily Carter, and I was 27 years old the afternoon my family handed my brother 3,400 acres of prime Texas ranch land and handed me a collapsing barn full of rats. My grandfather had not even been buried for 48 hours. The lawyer unfolded the will. My brother Jake sat beside my mother wearing the smile of a man already spending money that wasn't his. And then Grandpa's final wishes were read. Jake received the Carter Ranch, the cattle operation, the main house, the equipment, the grazing contracts, nearly everything everyone assumed he would get. Then the lawyer looked toward me. His voice softened. Emily receives Parcel 17. Nobody knew what Parcel 17 was. The lawyer handed me a map. My mother laughed first. Jake laughed second. The lawyer looked uncomfortable. Parcel 17 was a forgotten corner of the property. 40 acres, an abandoned barn, a dried-up creek, broken fencing, and land everyone believed was worthless. The room exploded. My aunt nearly choked on her coffee. Jake slapped the table. Grandpa left her that? Everybody laughed. Everybody except Grandpa's lawyer, because he wasn't laughing at all, and that should have been my first clue. If you've ever been treated like the extra child, the one nobody takes seriously, the one family already decided would never win, then this story is for you. Because 11 years later, the same people laughing that day would offer me $58 million for something they once called junk. But before we get there, you need to understand why nobody thought I deserved anything, including my own family. Growing up, Jake was the golden child, the future ranch owner, the Carter legacy, the son, the name, the heir. Everything revolved around him. Football games, county fairs, livestock competitions. My mother had photos of Jake covering entire walls. Meanwhile, I was the daughter who asked too many questions, the daughter who liked blueprints more than rodeos, the daughter who spent time fixing broken machinery instead of showing prize cattle. According to my mother, that made me strange. According to my grandpa, that made me smart. And those two opinions shaped my entire life. When I was 16, Grandpa took me into the old barn, the same barn everyone mocked years later. Dust floated through sunlight, the roof leaked, the doors barely opened. It smelled like rust and history. Grandpa stood quietly, then asked, "What do you see?" I looked around. A mess. He laughed, then pointed at the beams, the foundation, the layout, the structure. "What else?" I looked harder. Finally, I said, "Potential." Grandpa smiled. "Exactly." Then he said something I never forgot. Most people only see what something is today. The winners see what it becomes tomorrow. At 16, I didn't understand. 11 years later, I would. The years passed. Jake stayed on the ranch. I left. College, engineering, commercial development. Every family gathering became the same conversation. Jake was keeping building the family future. Emily had abandoned her roots, at least according to Mom. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every birthday, the comments never stopped. Jake's keeping Grandpa proud. Emily works in some office now. Jake understands real work. Emily wouldn't survive a week on the ranch. The funny thing, nobody ever asked what I actually did. Nobody cared. They already had their story, and stories are dangerous once families start believing them. Grandpa stayed different. He called every Sunday, every single Sunday for nearly 20 years. He asked questions nobody else asked. How was work? What projects were you building? What problems were you solving? Who are you becoming? Not once did he ask how much money I made, only who I was becoming. That's the difference between people who love you and people who evaluate you. 3 months before Grandpa died, he called unexpectedly. His voice sounded older, tired, like a man who knew something everyone else didn't. "Emily." "Yeah, Grandpa?" "You still remember the barn?" I laughed. "The falling apart one?" He laughed too. "The very same." Then he became serious. "Promise me something. Anything. When the time comes, don't sell it." I frowned. "What?" "Just promise." I hesitated, then said yes. He thanked me. We talked another 10 minutes, and that was the last real conversation we ever had. 3 months later, he was gone. Heart attack, peaceful, quick, 87 years old, and suddenly the entire family became obsessed with inheritance. Not grief, not memories, not loss, inheritance. Money changes people, sometimes overnight. The will reading felt less like a funeral and more like an auction. Everybody waiting to see who won, everybody waiting to see who lost. I already knew which category they placed me in. The moment Parcel 17 appeared on that map, the room decided. I was the loser. Again. Jake walked outside afterwards, laughing with friends. My mother cornered me in the parking lot. "Don't make a fuss." I stared at her. "What fuss?" "You know Grandpa wasn't thinking clearly." There it was, the insult disguised as concern, the family specialty. "He loved you, honey, but obviously Jake needed the ranch." Obviously. Always obviously. That night I drove out alone, to Parcel 17, to my barn, the one everybody laughed at, the one nobody wanted, the one Grandpa specifically gave me. Sunset painted the Texas sky orange. The barn stood exactly I remembered. Old, crooked, forgotten. Alone. Kind of like me. I unlocked the door, stepped inside. Dust everywhere. Broken equipment, old shelves, collapsed workbenches. Nothing valuable, nothing obvious, nothing worth millions. Just an abandoned building. Exactly what everyone believed. Exactly what I believed, too. At first. Then I remembered Grandpa's voice. "What else do you see?" Potential. So instead of selling it, I kept it, just like I promised. And for years, everybody laughed. Jake expanded the ranch, my mother bragged about her son, family gatherings stayed exactly the same. Every joke landed on me, every comparison favored him, every conversation reminded me where I ranked, or so they thought. Because while they watched Jake's ranch, nobody was watching the land underneath my barn. And 11 years later, that would become the biggest mistake any of them ever made. One rainy October morning, a black SUV pulled into my driveway. The man stepping out wore an expensive suit, the kind that means serious money. He introduced himself, then handed me a business card. A major energy company, Fortune 500, national level, not local, not regional, national. My stomach tightened, because people like him don't drive 3 hours to discuss old barns. They drive 3 hours when something underneath the barn matters. A lot. He looked toward Parcel 17 on the map hanging in my office, then asked a question that changed everything. "Ms. Carter, has anyone ever talked to you about what's beneath your property?" And suddenly, Grandpa's final gift started making sense. The man from the energy company sat across from me in my office and slid a thick folder across the desk. I opened it. The first page made absolutely no sense. Geological surveys, mineral reports, ownership records, environmental studies. Numbers, maps, coordinates, pages and pages of information. I looked up. "I think you have the wrong property." He smiled. "No, Miss Carter. We've checked 3 times." Then he tapped a red circle on one of the maps. The circle sat directly beneath Parcel 17. directly beneath Grandpa's barn, directly beneath the property everyone laughed at. My heart started beating faster. What exactly am I looking at? The man leaned back, then said 6 words, words that would change my life forever. A very large natural gas reserve. The room suddenly felt smaller. I stared at him. What does that mean? He smiled again. It means your grandfather knew something. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. All I could think about was Grandpa standing inside that barn years ago. What else do you see? Potential. Not because of the barn, not because of the land, because of what was underneath it. The energy company had been conducting regional surveys for nearly 2 years. Most of the surrounding properties had already signed exploration agreements. Several ranch owners had sold mineral rights. Others had negotiated royalties. But Parcel 17 had remained untouched. One reason: ownership. Mine. The representative flipped another page, then another, then another. Every number became larger. Every projection became more unbelievable. Finally, I stopped reading. I looked directly at him. What is this worth? He paused. Professional people always pause before large numbers. Then he answered, potentially tens of millions. I laughed, not because it was funny, because it was impossible. The barn, the joke, the family embarrassment, the consolation prize, the thing nobody wanted, the thing Grandpa specifically told me not to sell. Tens of millions. My hands started shaking. That night, I drove to the property. The barn looked exactly the same. Rust, dust, broken wood, silence. But now I looked at it differently. Now I understood why Grandpa had protected it, why he separated it from the ranch, why he made sure ownership stayed isolated, why he made me promise. The old man knew, maybe not the exact value, maybe not the exact reserve, but he knew something valuable sat beneath that ground, and he knew exactly which grandchild would keep it. 3 weeks later, the first offer arrived, $12 million. I stared at the number for nearly 10 minutes. 12 million. For property my family mocked for 11 years? I called my attorney, then my financial advisor, then nobody else, especially not my family. I had learned that lesson long ago. But secrets don't stay secret forever, especially in small Texas towns, and especially when energy companies start showing up. Within 2 months, everybody knew. Everybody. The ranch hands knew, the bank knew, the church knew, the diner knew, and eventually, my family knew. The first call came from Mom, after nearly 4 months of silence. Funny how money improves cell reception. Emily? Her voice sounded sweet, too sweet. I already knew. She knew. Hi, Mom. How have you been? There it was, the fake beginning, the warm-up, the setup. I waited. 23 seconds later, she finally asked, So, I heard something interesting. Of course she did. The story changed overnight. Suddenly, I wasn't the family disappointment. Now I was successful. Now I was hardworking. Now I was misunderstood. Funny how wealth edits family history. Then Jake called. That shocked me more, because Jake never called, ever. Not birthdays, not holidays, not emergencies, nothing. Yet somehow he found time now. He got straight to the point. How much are they offering? Not hello, not congratulations, not how are you? Just money. Always money. I told him it wasn't finalized. There was a long silence. Then he laughed. You got lucky. Lucky, that word. Successful people hear it constantly. People never call 11 years of patience lucky. They only notice the result. I didn't argue. There was no point, because Jake needed luck to be the answer. The alternative was harder. The alternative meant Grandpa chose correctly. The alternative meant the family had been wrong for over a decade, and that possibility terrified him. Over the next year, negotiations continued. The reserve turned out larger than expected, much larger. Every new survey increased value. Every new report changed projections. 12 million became 20, 20 became 35, 35 became 50, then higher, much higher. Meanwhile, something strange started happening. People from my family began visiting. Aunts, cousins, uncles, people I hadn't spoken to in years. Suddenly, everyone wanted lunch, coffee, dinner, family time, relationships. Funny timing. One afternoon, my mother arrived unannounced. She stood inside my office looking around. The same office she once called a phase. The same business she once refused to discuss. She smiled, then said something unbelievable. You know, your grandfather always knew you'd be successful. I almost laughed, because I remembered every word, every kitchen conversation, every dismissal, every judgment, every time she told people I never amounted to much. Now, Grandpa always knew you'd successful. Amazing revision. I simply nodded. Let her talk. People reveal themselves when you stop interrupting. Then she finally arrived at the real reason for the visit. We've been thinking. Dangerous words. We've been thinking. Never good. She folded her hands. The ranch and the barn really belonged together. There it was, finally, the truth. Not concern, not family, not healing, ownership. The ranch should benefit too. I looked at her. Grandpa separated them. He didn't understand what would happen. No, he understood perfectly. That's exactly why he separated them. Mom kept talking, explaining, justifying, rationalizing, until finally she said what she actually meant. You should share. Share. The word families use when they want your money, not their money, your money. I asked her one question. Would Jake share the ranch? Silence. Immediate silence, because both of us knew the answer. No, he never would. He never had. He never planned to. The sharing only moved one direction, toward him. Always toward him. A week later, I received official valuation reports. I opened them alone, read every page, twice, then a third time, because I honestly couldn't believe the number. The reserve estimates had increased again, significantly. The final projected value exceeded $58 million. $58 million. The barn, the joke, the thing nobody wanted. $58 million. I sat quietly for nearly an hour. Then I drove to Grandpa's grave. The sun was setting. Texas sky, orange horizon, long shadows. Exactly the kind of evening he loved. I stood there alone, then finally spoke. You knew. A breeze moved through the cemetery. You absolutely knew. For the first time in years, I cried. Not because of the money, because of the faith. Because one person saw me correctly. One person. That was enough. 3 months later, the final offer arrived. Official. Binding. $58 million. I signed. The deal closed. The wire transfer landed. And within 48 hours, my family called an emergency meeting. For the first time in my life, I was suddenly the most important person in the room, but the reason they wanted me there had nothing to do with love and everything to do with $58 million. The thing about heartbreak is that most people think it arrives all at once. It doesn't. Sometimes it arrives in pieces, spread across decades, hidden inside ordinary moments you don't understand until much later. My father sat across from me in my office, turning that old hat in his hands. And for the first time in my life, Roy Hill looked scared. Not angry, not proud, scared. Because he genuinely believed I might take away his retirement. Not because that's who I was, but because that's what he would have expected from someone with power. The realization hit me harder than anything that happened at the banquet. Not the humiliation, not my mother's words, not even the silence afterward. This, the fact that my father had spent 12 years misunderstanding me so completely that he thought revenge was the first thing I'd choose. I leaned back in my chair. Dad. His eyes lifted. I already signed your package, weeks ago. He blinked. What? I approved everything before the dinner. The pension, the bonus, the consulting contract, all of it. His face went blank, like a man hearing a language he didn't understand. You knew? Of course I knew. You knew who I was. You're my father. The room went silent, and something inside him broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. Like old wood finally giving way after carrying too much weight for too many years. He lowered his head. Then I heard it, a sound I had never heard from Roy Hill before, a sob. Just one, but it felt like an earthquake. I was wrong. His voice cracked. I was so damn wrong. I didn't answer, because some apologies need room to breathe, and some wounds are too old to heal in a single conversation. He rubbed his face. I thought I was protecting you. There it was, the lie parents tell themselves when they choose one child over another. Protection. I had heard it my entire life. I waited. When your brother got Grandpa's ranch, he swallowed. We thought you weren't built for that life. I laughed once, not because it was funny, because it wasn't. You gave him 3,000 acres. You gave me a collapsing barn. His eyes closed. I know. No, Dad, you know now. The distinction mattered, because knowing after the fact isn't the same as knowing when it counts. He stared at the floor, and for the first time, he didn't argue, didn't defend himself, didn't explain. He simply accepted it. That mattered more than any apology, because accountability is rare, especially from people who spent decades being certain they were right. He stayed another hour. We talked, not as father and daughter, not yet, just two adults trying to find the bridge between them. Before he left, he stopped at my office door. There was something in that barn. I smiled. There was. His eyes watered. I never checked. No. I should have. Yeah. He nodded slowly, then left, and I sat alone for a long time after, because forgiveness is strange. People think it's a gift you give someone else. Sometimes it's the gift you finally give yourself. 3 weeks later, my mother called. I almost didn't answer. Almost. But I did. Her voice sounded older, smaller. I need to ask you something. Okay? A pause. Then the sentence that would have been impossible for her a month ago. Can we have lunch? No accusations, no manipulation, no performance. Just a question. I agreed. We met at a small diner halfway between our towns. No audience, no church friends, no family, no stage. Just us. She arrived early, for the first time in my life, and when I sat down, she looked nervous. That alone told me everything had changed. We ordered coffee, then silence. Finally, she spoke. "I don't know how to talk to you anymore." I stared at her. "Did you ever?" The question landed. She looked down. "No." That honesty surprised me, more than the banquet, more than the public humiliation, because truth spoken quietly is often more powerful than truth spoken publicly. She folded her hands. "When I was young," her voice trembled, "my father lost everything." I had never heard this story, not once. He trusted the wrong people. We nearly lost the farm. The bank took most of it. She looked out the window. And everybody talked. There it was again. The fear. The obsession with appearances. The thing that had ruled her entire life. After that, I decided nobody would ever look down on my family again. I nodded. "I know. I just didn't realize." She stopped. Tears filled her eyes. "That I was the one doing the looking down." That sentence hit harder than every apology before it, because it was true. My mother spent 40 years trying to protect herself from judgment and became judgment itself. We talked for 3 hours. Not everything got fixed. Real life doesn't work that way. But something started. And sometimes that's enough. 6 months passed, then 1 year, then 2. The ranch changed everything. Not because of the money, because of what the money revealed. My brother, Jason's ranch, struggled. The land he'd been handed never became what he imagined, because gifts don't automatically create success. People do. Meanwhile, the old barn became the headquarters of a restoration company worth more than anyone in the family ever imagined. The irony wasn't lost on anybody, especially Jason. One evening, he called. First time in years. "You busy?" "No." A pause, then he laughed. "You know what drives me crazy?" "What?" "They gave me everything." I smiled. "And?" "And somehow you still won." There was no bitterness in it, just truth. I looked across the property. The ranch lights glowed against the sunset. Workers finishing for the day. Trucks rolling out. Families going home. Lives being built. I didn't win. Jason laughed. "Sure you did." "No." I shook my head. "I just didn't quit." Silence. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Maybe that's why Grandpa left you the barn." I froze. "What?" He knew. "Knew what?" Jason laughed again. "That I'd see land. You'd see opportunity." And suddenly, all those years snapped into focus. Grandpa, the old man who barely talked, the old man who spent hours teaching me how engines worked, how fences were built, how broken things could be repaired instead of replaced. Maybe he hadn't left me less. Maybe he'd left me exactly what he thought I needed. Not wealth, potential. Not security, possibility. The barn wasn't a punishment. It was a test. And 11 years later, I finally understood. 3 years after the banquet hall, the entire family gathered again, this time for Grandpa's memorial dedication.
a bronze plaque near the property entrance. Everybody came. Church friends, neighbors, workers, family, the whole town. And this time nobody introduced me as the daughter who never amounted to much. Nobody had to, because people eventually become impossible to misunderstand. My father stood beside me, older now, softer. My mother sat quietly in the front row. Jason stood with his wife and kids. And as the ceremony ended, a reporter from the local paper asked me the question everyone always asks. What's the biggest lesson? I looked across the ranch. The fields, the restored barn, the families, the workers, the life built from something everyone else dismissed. Then I answered. The people who underestimate you are usually measuring you with the wrong ruler. The reporter smiled.
I kept going. If someone hands you a rusted barn, while they give someone else a ranch, I looked toward the crowd. Don't waste your life arguing about fairness. Open the door. See what's inside. The crowd went quiet. And somewhere in the front row, my mother started crying. Not from shame, not anymore, from understanding. The kind that arrives years late, but arrives anyway. That evening, after everyone left, I stood alone inside the barn. The same beams, the same wood, the same smell of dust and oil, only now it was full of life. I reached into my wallet, pulled out an old folded piece of paper, the original business sketch, the first dream, the one everyone dismissed. I looked at it one last time. Then I smiled, walked outside, and dropped it into the fire pit. The paper curled, darkened, turned to ash. Because I didn't need it anymore, not as proof, not as motivation, not as a reminder. The people who doubted me no longer owned space in my future, and the girl who needed their approval had finally gone home. The end.